Hey everybody, welcome to my back porch. Well, I watched the latest episode of Ancient Aliens, and I wanted to talk about this connection between Enoch being the designer of the pyramids somehow and aliens, and where they get this from. And they mention a medieval Egyptian historian named Al-Maqrizi, and it was late 13th century into the 14th century that he was trying to create a history of Egypt. He was a historian, and had to get it from several different sources because, as a historian, you really want to get your primary source information being people who were actually contemporary and there and wrote it down. Big problem is the people who wrote it down wrote it in hieroglyphs, and in the early 1400s, nobody could read Egyptian hieroglyphs. So he had to kind of get from other historians and just asking people history. Now, there's no English translation really that you could buy his book in English, but if you go to jasoncolavito.com, he has translated it from French into English so you can kind of read it for yourself and see where I'm coming from. So on Ancient Aliens, they reference Al-Maqrizi. He uses these stories. He says that the pyramids were built by a king named Surid. And he references several different stories, and they all say it was this King Surid. A lot of them say they were built about 300 years before the flood, and that they may have had writing on the outside. Now, if you look at the pyramid of Menkaure, I believe it still has its casing stones at the top. If you look at a picture and you look at those casing stones, I'm not the only one that thinks this, but it does look like at one point there was writing carved in there, like there's still remnants of it there. I don't know, take a look, see what you think. That may be true. Now, how they kind of connect the Surid to Enoch is because in the stories of King Surid, he had this dream about stars falling out of the sky and this cataclysms and whatnot. And the Arab historians likened that to kind of connected him through those dreams. In the book of Enoch, Enoch had the same dreams about 300 years before the flood. Somehow they also associate him with, they call him Idris, and associate him with the Hermes in Upper Egypt that was in charge of a lot of knowledge and started the science and alchemy, things like that, and carved it into the temple walls so that it would be preserved for a long time. Now, in a lot of these stories that Al-Maqrizi puts in, pretty much all of them state that the pyramids were built as tombs, that people were in them, and there was a lot of treasure crammed into them. That's also part of the legends. They also say that there was knowledge written all over the insides, the outsides. Of course, today that's not true. Also, it says that not the Great Pyramid, but one to the west supposedly has 30 rooms in it. Last I heard, it didn't have 30 rooms, but who knows? So the big question is, all of these historians, these Arab historians, have come up with the name of the person who built the pyramid, the king who ordered it. And by the way, according to those historians, he carved on the outside of the pyramid that he built that in 6 years. and then a bunch of smack talking about come knock it down. It's, if you get the chance, go read it. It's kind of a hard read, but gives you an idea of all the different versions of who built what and when. But it's odd that they have this name Surid. And if we look at the kings list, of course, they list all the kings. The first one in the kings list is named Menes, even though the first king, according to the palette, was a guy named Narmer. Could be the same guy. But if you start reading kings lists, you'll get Menes and Titi and Khufu and Menkaure and Khafre. There's no Surids in there. But if you're a crazy person like me, and you've been an Egyptomaniac since you were 4 years old, eventually you pick up being able to read hieroglyphs. And if you take another step like I did and take a course in it, you can stumble through it. But you can see kings' names and things like that and recognize titles. And I notice if they're getting a lot of their history from an oral tradition because nobody can read the hieroglyphs. And even Al-Maqrizi writes in the histories, even after all this, there's no agreement on who built these things and when, just like today, 600 years later. But they all said Surid. And if you notice, in front of every king's cartouche is two hieroglyphs. And they mean son of the sun god Ra. It's a duck and a sun. And in ancient Egyptian, the words are Sa-Re. I'm wondering, just as the Greeks, for whatever reason, and nobody can explain this to me properly, perverted Egyptian names of cities and people and gods, it's possible that that game of telephone, through history, it's possible that all kings were called Sa-Re, and it just came off as Sarid. It's possible, but it doesn't answer the question on who it was. It was definitely an Egyptian pharaoh. So in the end, without super conclusive evidence, there is just really no way concretely to say who built the Great Pyramid and when. All the circumstantial evidence definitely points to a major project on the Giza Plateau involving stone and Tura stones during the reign of Khufu. So right now, since you can convict somebody on circumstantial evidence, they say Khufu built the pyramid. But there isn't really hard evidence. You know, they didn't find his body in there or any of his little goodies, and they didn't write anything on the walls. So in the end, since it was looted a long time ago, we've lost all this information. So barring some piece of carved datable text found under the footer of the pyramid, which there may be a foundation deposit, that was tradition, but kind of hard to get to, I'm sure. There's no reason to say. So in the end, Surid could be any pharaoh. Could be previous to the flood, long before the modern Egyptian civilization, long before the Old Kingdom. Could be Khufu. We don't know. On a side note, I read the book of Enoch, and I can't see any place that it really connects to Egypt in any way. Really? So, if nothing else, the Al-Maqrizi stories don't bolster the Ancient Aliens show or theory at all. It more bolsters Graham Hancock and Brian Forster's theory of a previous Ice Age civilization, which I think there's a lot of compelling evidence for, and it requires more research. Anyway, Let me know what you think in the comments. If you like, subscribe. Join me on my back porch. We'll talk about more crazy stuff. Anyway, thanks for watching till the very end.